So, superhero movies are a popular genre in Hollywood, and many of them have achieved huge success at the global box office. However, not all superhero movies are equally successful. So, what are the elements that make a superhero movie a $1 billion hit? Stay tuned as Dave Bratton and I figure all this out.
Anachronic.
Hi, comic guys and gals. I'm Joe, and I've got Dave Bratton here with me. There he is, the man, the only movie mogul that I know that doesn't make movies. Dave knows so much about movies. I asked him to join me on this quest to figure out what are the elements that make not only a hit, but potentially a $1 billion movie. Dave, thanks for coming on the show and being with me to discuss this topic.
Joe, thanks for having me. I love talking about this stuff.
I know you talk about movies like crazy. So I figured when we talked about this, when I was thinking about this, and yeah, and you said, hey, I wouldn't mind being part of it. I said, that's perfect. That's perfect.
I was very passive aggressive about that.
That's okay. I love it because that means you're on this show now. So, so let's talk a little bit about it. I mean, I know we, since we decided we were going to do this, we both did a little bit of digging on this, and I've given some thought to it. And to me, it seems that there are at least three things you got to start off with. And so let me bring these up, and I'll look at my notes as we go along to make sure I got it right here. But I think the first three things that I look at that you really need is you need a kind of a compelling hero. It's a hero that people care about.
Mhm.
You need to have like a villain. I mean, a worthy villain. We see some of these movies where we say, well, who's this villain? What is he doing here?
Right.
Not significant. And the third thing is some kind of a captivating story, something that really grabs people.
Right.
I mean, to me, there's a lot of elements, and we'll talk about them. But
Sure.
to me, that seems to be the three things that if you don't have any one of them, chances are you may have a difficult time making, making a hit movie.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, actually, when you brought this idea up, I dug pretty heavily into that list that you sent my way of the 14 live action superhero movies that have crossed the $1 billion mark. And I came up with similar things, but maybe slightly different. One of the things I noticed about those 14
Well,
films.
before you get to them, then,
Oh,
since you mentioned the 14, let's show everybody who the 14 are. Okay,
do that.
let's do that. That's a great introduction. Okay, hold on. Let's do it. So those are the 14 that I came up with, and we could talk about some of them individually. Of course, uh, perhaps Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness should get an honorable mention because it's just a little bit short
So
of
close.
a billion. Almost there. So I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, but since you brought it up, I said, let's show everybody what we're talking about.
No, that was perfect. That was
Okay.
perfect. So one thing I noticed about those movies, they had um, a mix of all of these things.
Mhm.
One, all those movies were sequels. They were all sequels, except some were direct, some were indirect.
Right.
And we can dig into that a little bit. Most, not all, but most had multiple heroes in them.
Right. Mhm.
Another one that almost all of them featured, not all of them, but almost all of them featured a pop culture icon. Now, whether they started, for example, Iron Man is now a pop culture icon.
Right.
I would argue that he was not that when he first came out in 2008. And after that film with Robert Downey Jr., that propelled that character to that status, to that
I think it
stratosphere.
was, and I think it was pretty much almost the last scene where he divulges that he's Iron Man. And everybody went
Yeah.
crazy in the room,
Yeah.
and people went crazy in the theater as well.
Yeah, I mean, it made me care about a character I had not cared about before. If you dug through my comic book
Exactly.
collection, you'd find like 4 Iron Man comics,
I have
you know?
one Iron Man Silver Age comic in my collection.
Yeah,
That's it, one.
yeah. So, I would say a pop culture icon to some degree, and again, there are varying degrees of that in these films. And
Right.
then what you alluded to, you want a compelling story, and I looked at the critical and audience scores for these movies, and almost all of them were high. Again, a couple of exceptions where they're a bit lower, um, and then actually timing matters, and we can dig into that a
That's
little
another
bit
element
later.
as well, which we should talk about a little bit.
Yeah, yeah,
But the thing is, people say, well, you need a compelling hero. And you were right about this because people are saying, like, well, look what James Gunn has done with Guardians of the Galaxy, right?
mhm,
I mean, but the point of the matter is that those three elements that I mentioned,
mhm.
and we'll get into some of the other ones, timing and stuff that happens in there,
Sure.
because I think that's important. But those three elements, they don't stand alone. I mean, they cross
Yeah,
over into each one. I
mhm,
mean, you mentioned Iron Man, and we could say that, but let's look at the Guardian of the Galaxy people. I knew something about some of them
mhm.
only from the fact that I'm kind of consider myself a amateur comic book historian, and going back into the Silver Age, and
Right,
I knew about some of these people, and I had heard about them beforehand,
mhm.
but I hadn't read one book that had any of them in it. But
Right,
at the end of the
nor
first
did I.
movie, I said, "This is pretty cool, and I'd like to see
Yeah.
more about these people, and see what's going on and see their growth." And
I
so it became the story, um, and the people together, just putting that all together, which made us care and made them basically captivating, if you want to call it a
Yeah,
story, and heroes that I care about.
yes. I care about Star-Lord now. I don't
Yeah,
know if I'd heard of Star-Lord
I
before,
don't think
you
so.
know? So, yeah, and look, those are great examples of movies that had a lot of this and were big successes. We're just focused on the billion-dollar movies. There are lots of really successful
Yeah, and
superhero
we
movies
don't
too.
because I don't
Yeah,
even know if $1 billion is really what we should be looking at. But let's
right.
start off with that, and we can kind of delve,
Sure,
if we have some time, delve into some of the other stuff.
sure.
So anyway, all right. Well, you talked about timing. I mean,
Yeah,
I think one of the other things I think we talked about, it was like a worthy villain and so forth. I mean,
yeah.
when you take a look at some of the villains that have come out, I mean, I think like in the first Shazam movie, I mean, like Savannah and so forth, that was pretty good.
Yeah.
But the second movie was a little bit too, I don't know.
I
The
I
villains were
thought it was
good.
more
They weren't,
they're
they weren't
more
the type of villain that you hated necessarily. I don't know
They
how to
were
put
more
it, but that's
complicated, they were more complex,
right,
and they also were only developed over 1 film. Thanos is a villain he made his appearances in a few movies, and then they really developed him over Infinity War and
right,
Endgame, and what an incredible villain. And by the way, those 2 that I just mentioned are the 2 highest grossing superhero films of all time, and they're just loaded with all of the things you want. Tons of superheroes, a bunch of them after they'd already been established in their own movies and sort of were elevated in status.
right.
We'd all heard of Iron Man, we'd all heard of Captain America and Thor, and a lot of people in the comics realm were really big fans. But in popular culture, they weren't as big as Superman and Batman until their movies came out.
Right.
And so when you put all of them together and you have a great villain and you tell great stories, which I thought those films did, I mean, that's where the money magic happened.
Well,
And
let's look at
oh,
I won't even talk about necessarily the heroes, because you mentioned Batman, right? So I think, to
mhm,
me, because of the villains that Batman has, you could make good Batman, or really good Batman movies.
right.
So Keith Ledger's Joker is just, to me, is just one of the amazing performances.
Well,
And he was the star of that movie as far as I'm concerned. It wasn't necessarily Batman.
Well, he was phenomenal, and
Yeah.
that to me, and we can get into this later, but there are a couple of these movies that stand out to me for a couple reasons. There are a couple that stand out. I view them as the most impressive of the billion-dollar films,
Well, let's talk about
and
them
they're
now.
okay. The one you brought up, Dark Knight. Why
Yeah.
is it the most impressive? It was the first. It was the first billion-dollar. Now we can go back into older films that with inflation have maybe caught up to that, but
Right.
in terms of the billion-dollar films, Dark Knight was a game changer.
Yeah.
Iron Man, I wanna say it made something like 650, which is a lot of money. Batman
Mhm.
Begins, I think, barely cracked 400 or maybe not even quite, but Dark Knight hit the billion-dollar mark and just blew everyone's minds when it accomplished that feat. And that was, I think, for a lot of reasons. I think Heath Ledger is the Joker. I think, unfortunately, Heath Ledger's untimely death
Right.
probably elevated the curiosity factor with that film, but the fact that he played the Joker, who I consider a pop culture icon,
Mhm.
the
I
Joker,
agree.
I mean, the fact that the Joker film with, Joaquin Phoenix is in there sort of speaks to that as well.
Mhm.
Um, you have a pop culture icon in the hero and the villain, and you have an incredible Oscar-winning performance by Heath Ledger. I mean, so to me, The Dark Knight, that's the first one. That's one of the most impressive. It's considered one of the best superhero films of all time. And then the second one to me is The Avengers.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is it was another game changer in that it brought multiple franchise heroes together in one film and sort of really got the ball rolling on the let's bring in lots of different heroes who are now elevated in status. I mean, the X-Men obviously is a team movie,
Right.
but Thor is probably bigger than a lot of the X-Men, and Iron Man after those movies is bigger, and Captain America, thanks to his movies, is bigger. So you bring them together, and that movie makes over $1.5 billion, which that's another benchmark that kind of opened eyes and blew minds that it could reach that height. So those are the two that kind of they sort of set those benchmarks, when
Right.
no
And
one was
if you look
looking
at some,
for it.
I agree with you. I mean, those are two benchmark movies. I see what you're saying, and I agree with you. And looking at some of these things, I mean, one of the movies that surprised me a little bit was the Captain Marvel movie. That
There are a few on this list that surprised me because
Yeah, I didn't think that
yeah,
it done that well. But you see, I think part of that is that people were expecting her to play a big part in, Endgame, let's say, and I don't know that it really happened that way. And
yeah,
so, and it was like it was a historical. It went back into the 1990s,
mhm,
and I have to be honest with you. I mean, I watched it once. I didn't particularly
same.
like it.
Oh, okay.
Um, and so I at this point in time in my head, I can't even tell you what the storyline was, other
Right,
than kind of her origin type of thing. You
right.
know?
Yeah. No, I remember seeing it, I'm like, "Oh, it's pretty good."
Yeah.
It wasn't I don't that movie fell into a second list that I created on this, and it was the most perplexing on, and that was my first, and that's because when I categorized it, was it a
Yeah.
sequel? It was an indirect sequel. It was not a direct sequel, but you alluded to something. The final scene in Infinity War was Samuel L. Jackson hitting a beeper and the Captain Marvel symbol
Yeah.
pops up.
Right.
So I think the fact that that came out in between those 2 movies really elevated that film. It made it a part of it.
Yes.
And that's what we're seeing with all these Marvel films. They're all connected. Like you can argue that every single Marvel film is a sequel to the first Iron Man. Like they all kind of it just keeps progressing, that they're all sequels. So it was sort of a sequel. Did it feature multiple heroes? Not really, but Nick Fury played a huge role in it. So if you want to count him, and he was a mainstay and is a mainstay in the Marvel universe, okay. So that's where it sort of connects there. As far as a pop culture icon, I would argue no.
No.
So she doesn't check that box, and unless I'm missing something, and maybe she will be elevated to that status with the Marvels and other films. And then the critics' response. It actually 79 from the critics on Rotten Tomatoes
That's
and
not bad.
45 from the audience, which was bad. But I think the reason it was so low with the audience is there were a lot of people who did not hide the fact that they were disdainful of a female lead when it came to that, and they didn't like Brie
Really?
Larson, or so they review bombed it. So I take that audience score with a pretty large grain of salt.
I mean, I didn't know that. I
Yeah.
mean, why would you even think that? I mean, I don't know, whatever.
Some people. So I don't know. They're just it seemed like there's a lot of hate for Brie Larson, and
That I get, but I mean, I don't know
yeah.
if it's because of she's a woman, but for some reason she doesn't come across heroic to me. I don't know in her guise.
I don't know. I can't I think a lot of people didn't like her, so they didn't like the movie,
Yeah,
or
maybe.
they spoke ill of the movie. So that one was one that kind of didn't check the boxes the way a lot of them did. But as the one thing I noticed, is when I went through this, list, was the timing of a lot of
Yes.
these films. Out
Yes.
of these 14 films, 7 of them came out within 2 years, 2018 and 2019. That
Right.
seems to be the peak, the zenith of this genre, and we'll get into why 2020, and people can start guessing why that changed things. Um, but 7 out of these 14, and she was right, her movie, Captain Marvel, was right in the middle of it, and teased by one of the biggest superhero movies of all time in Infinity War, and
Me
then
too.
followed up in the biggest superhero movie of all time in Endgame. So I
So
think that probably
timing, yeah.
floated
So
that boat.
timing could mean a couple of different things.
Yeah.
So I mean, we can get into that now a little bit.
Okay.
I mean, timing could be, and using that Captain Marvel movie as a I guess a prime example is
Mhm.
at the end of Infinity Wars when he's melting away.
Yeah.
His phone he's pressing the button, whatever it is, and
Yeah.
it's signaling Captain Marvel. And people now were anticipating that we were kind of a year away for the end of that cycle and
Right.
end game by its own name, right? And so the thing is like, all right, Captain Marvel, we're waiting for her. What's gonna so
Yeah.
that's one type of timing.
Yes.
Your movie can really benefit
Right.
based on when it comes out with respect to other movies. And if the DCU kind of follows the same route now, you're going to be seeing, like, whether it's an animated movie or whether it's a live action movie or whether it's something on Max, you're going to be
Mhm.
anticipating and waiting. Okay, this character, they're going to go towards a whatever type of movie it's
Yeah.
going to be. What's going to happen? I
Right.
mean, I think the new Flash movie, people are saying that could be potentially $1 billion movie.
Agreed.
I don't know, but the point of the matter is, it's more of like an anticipation in one end, saying, is this going to have some relevance
Mhm.
to the new DCU? And it also, from a timing standpoint, is and if our pal Pretty Fly was here, it's like the last vestiges of the Snyderverse, and all of the people that are Snyderverse still, like, it lives. They're
Yeah.
gonna go want to see that because they want to see Ben Affleck, there. They're
Batman,
hoping to
yeah.
see, some of Henry Cavill's Superman there. Then they're hoping to see some of the other stuff because
Gal Gadot,
they still
maybe?
want it. So in some ways, the timing of this movie could be of some benefit to it as well.
I also think that movie is checking some of these boxes in the heaviest, blackest marker ink it could. Is it a sequel? Yeah, it's a sequel to multiple films. Any of the Snyder films with The
Right.
Flash. It's a sequel to the original Batman films. It's a sequel to Man of Steel in a way. So it's heavy on the sequelitis. Multiple heroes, not just multiple heroes, who are also pop culture icons, but multiple versions that were iconic, whether it's
Right.
Michael Keaton's Batman or Ben Affleck's Batman. I mean, and if rumors are true, we may at least get glimpses of tons of other icons. So I
Yeah.
think that
That's what I
movie is
heard. Yeah.
like doubling down on some of the things that really seem to make a $1 billion movie. Again, time will tell. Ultimately, it's got to be a good story. It's got to be a good movie. It's got to be executed well. Because if you don't have a good story, you can throw in as many cameos and as many characters as you want, and it's not going to make $1 billion. Just look at the Justice League when they released that film. That has Superman, it has Batman, it has Wonder Woman, it has Aquaman, it has Flash. That movie made $650 million. and it's because it was a product of, we've covered the studio interference, and, like, I enjoy that film, but when I watch it, I'm like, "Oh, I like this." I don't view it as a great film, though.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, you need the story,
Yeah, I don't
but
want to
there's
get
a
into.
good
We
element to
have a lot
streaming.
of videos under the DC Watch banner that
We
discusses
do.
all of that. So if you're really interested, just go to my channel
Let me
and
know.
check out. There's a DC Watch list of movies, and
Yes.
have fun going through that, because I don't know if we had fun doing it, but it was fun to. It was good to have it there historically anyway.
Yeah.
So that's one element of time. But you
Yeah.
mentioned 2018, 2019.
Those are the 2
And a
years.
lot of these movies, that are on the list came out there, or like the end of 2017, made their money in 2018.
Mhm.
So what's your point on that?
That seems to be when the stars aligned, when superhero movies were at their fever pitch. There's actually another superhero film that's not live action that made over $1 billion in 2018, and that was The Incredibles 2.
Mhm.
Also a sequel with multiple heroes featuring now pop culture icons, The Incredibles. In 2004, it was the first we ever saw of them. They
Right.
quickly became that. But that seems to be those 2 years superhero movies were at their apex.
Mhm.
That many in that short a time is remarkable. Then 2020 hits. We have COVID, which shuts everything
Right.
down and sort of pushes the viewer towards streaming. And now there are going to be billion-dollar superhero movies again. Flash might be one. Guardians of the Galaxy seems like Volume 3
It
might
it
be on its
might be
way.
close, yeah.
Might be. Doctor Strange was that close to being a billion-dollar film and a huge success. So I'm not saying they can't be as successful, but it seems like there's a chance they might not be. For example, the Batman. I Someone will fact check me. I don't think that made 800 million.
No, about
Um,
770 roughly.
yeah, and
Yeah,
that's Batman. We've
yeah.
established Batman is a pop culture icon, probably more so than any other superhero.
And
Maybe
that's also, yeah,
Spider-Man.
and that's also like a timing thing too, because people
Mhm.
looking, well, you have the Ben Affleck Batman, people wanted that, so
Yeah,
that hurt it in some way, saying, "I don't want this. I have a Batman. I want to see more of this Batman. Why can't I see more of this?" I mean, I think that could hurt it too, and that goes into the timing element as well.
yeah, I don't disagree, that's very possible. I will say this, for me, the streaming aspect hurt it. They announced the day it was released, in 45 days, it would be on HBO Max.
Yes, yes, that's right.
45 days. I
I
saw it in the
forgot that.
theater. I did not love that movie. I didn't.
Yeah,
But as you and I have discussed on numerous occasions, the second viewing is when you really make up your mind. I saw it in the theaters. I'm like, it's going to be on HBO Max in a month and a half. I'm not going back to the theaters to see it for
right,
a second time. I have
right.
HBO Max. I'm just going to wait. You know what? I never did watch it a second time. Um, so I think the streaming model has changed things because people can simply wait. I think they're less apt to wait when it comes to Marvel, simply because generationally, you have people in their 20s and 30s who are kids or very in their adolescence when these films came out, and they're such a huge part of their experience growing up. I mean, I was
Uh-huh.
reading a really interesting article. I sent it to you, or maybe I didn't. Maybe I need to send it to you about it's entitled "How Marvel Swallowed Hollywood." And there were
No, you didn't
people in
send it to me.
there. Oh, I need to send it to you.
Okay.
Sorry, Joe. And there were people in there saying that, like, the only movies they will go see in theaters are Marvel films.
Hmm.
They were such an important part of their adolescence or their childhood. So I think Marvel as a brand has been so strong that it's more immune, but not entirely immune. Look at the new Ant-Man film. That did not even make a half $1 billion.
Right, only the
Eh,
440 some odd thousand,
yeah,
440 some odd million, I
yeah.
think, yeah.
It wasn't a bad movie by any stretch, but
No, it was okay.
it was okay. But a lot of okay Marvel movies make a lot more than half $1 billion. So,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
and and I think part of it was, in some way, I mean, Kang was very disappointing to me
oh,
in
really?
that
He was
movie.
probably my favorite part. I thought the actor did a great job.
The actor did a
Yeah.
great job, but it wasn't, I don't know, to me, it seemed that he was overcome too easily by
Oh,
ants, you know what I mean? I don't know, it
okay.
was
All
just
right, fair enough.
a little
I
silly,
hear you.
you
I
know?
hear you.
I think it would
Yeah.
have been better if he had defeated them in some fashion, and
Hmm.
if Marvel had played that up
Okay.
for the next movie, because I
Okay.
think that's where it would have. I mean, they
You've
didn't have
been
to. He didn't
more
have to kill them or anything like that, but just somehow, escape, do what he needed to do, defeat them
right.
in that fashion. And then, like the next movie or two movies from now, he comes back and you'll build it up towards the Kang movies that they're supposed to, the
Okay.
Avengers Kang or movie, whatever it happens to
Okay.
be. That might have been a little bit better for me. But but
Yeah.
but but that aside, I hear what you're saying, and I think that's right. Marvel really kind of captured the audience there, with
They did.
respect to it. The other thing is with HBO Max. I mean, when they put in the Snyder cut, you know, Wonder Woman was a movie that they kept on. I mean, it wasn't a great movie. I agree, but
Which movie?
the 19 Wonder
84.
Woman
Wonder Woman
1984.
84? No.
Yeah.
No.
So, but
No.
they waited and they waited. Then they put it out in the movie theater for a while, and they put it at the same time on HBO Max.
Well, that was at the height of COVID, or when COVID was still really taking a toll. Maybe not the
Right.
height, but yeah,
Right.
that
But didn't Marvel,
yeah.
what movie was it? I can't remember now, but Marvel, was it the Spider-Man movie?
No Way
Marvel had a
Home
movie
came
that was
out,
basically done, but they waited
they waited,
and they
and
they
it
put it out after kind of a lot of the, craziness died down.
it's funny
Um,
because COVID was dying down, and then that movie came out, and then Omicron spiked, and I was like, "Oh, I wonder how many people Spider-Man's gonna get sick," because those numbers started going bonkers right around that
right.
time. But I think at that point now Spider-Man, No Way Home is also it checks those boxes in really heavy black ink. It wasn't a sequel to one film. It was a sequel to 7 films. It had multiple heroes that were all Spider-Man, all versions
That was
of a pop
terrific.
culture icon, with the critical score of 93, audience score of 98. I mean, it was a really good movie starring lots of Spider-Men from lots of movies that lots of people loved. That movie was like, that had no choice but to be a gigantic hit, which it was.
Right, and playing upon that, I mean, we were talking about movies that came out, and with respect to inflation and so forth, they might be $1 billion movie today. Well,
Right.
the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man from 2002 made 2002 made $825
Yeah.
million dollars, rounding it off, right? A little bit
Yeah.
more, right? So if you play inflation into that, today it would be a one
There you go.
billion $391,228,849.34 movie.
Did you memorize
So
that, Joe?
no, I have it right here.
I know.
So the thing is, they were building on the other two movies, right? Plus all the Avengers movies and things like that. They're building on
Doctor
those two
Strange was
movies,
in
you're
it, yeah.
right. But they're also building on two other Spider-Men, which, they were not too, I mean, they didn't really keep it too much of a secret, it seems to me.
Yeah,
But to me, I
wisely.
was like a Tobey Maguire guy because I remember when that movie came out, I went to see it. I think I saw it a few times, and I loved that movie. I
Okay.
thought it was great to actually see Spider-Man, doing that and being
Mhm.
there. And I
Yeah.
thought he was a good Spider-Man. I know a lot
Okay.
of people might not think that, but I thought it was great. And so I really wanted to see him again as
Yeah.
Spider-Man,
I
and
thought he was better as an older Spider-Man than he was
he
as
was
a
he
younger
was good,
Spider-Man, in my opinion.
I thought he
And I
sacrificed
liked Andrew
himself at one
Garfield.
moment, but apparently he survived, so that's good.
Yeah, that moment, I tell you, where's the spider sense? Where's the spider sense? He's about to get stabbed from behind, his spider sense doesn't go off?
Hey, he has the organic.
They
Hey, wait a
never
minute, but
do
he
a good
has the
job with the spider
organic
sense in
webbing.
movies.
He has the organic webbing.
Yeah, I just no, yeah, but yeah, now that you I said it was a sequel to 7 films because the first 3, the 2 Tom Holland and the 2 Andrew Garfield, but
Right.
if you wanna get technical about it, you could say it's a sequel to any movie Spider-Man has been in, including Civil War, the
Yeah.
Avengers films, and the Doctor Strange film, so, and films. Yeah, I mean, that movie was just and that's where Marvel's been really successful. If they put out a movie, you kinda have to see it because it's part of that series. No matter what they put out, it is either a direct or an indirect sequel to something they have done before, and that makes audiences, in my opinion, it gives them a little bit more impetus to go check it out in the theater.
Right, and look at all the villains that they had in there.
No,
These are
yeah.
all villains that supported
Yeah.
their own movie.
Yeah.
I
Agreed.
mean, so I mean,
Loaded it
that
up.
was just
So
the
cool.
fact that it ends up number 3. I mean, it could have really gone over 2 billion easily, and it was close enough, but it really
Oh, I
could have
thought it
been.
it didn't hit 2,000,000,000? For some
I
reason, I
don't
thought it
think
went
it
over two
did.
billion.
All right, hold on. Did I get that wrong?
I thought it was like
Let's see.
2.1 or maybe I'm wrong or I
I
could
thought
be
it
wrong.
was
Might
1.9 plus.
could be just under it. Could be just under it. Yeah.
Yeah, just under it, I believe.
It was a lot of money.
That's okay. But
Yeah,
so, I
of
mean, but
course.
as a practical matter, I mean, I think that just had everything in there.
Yeah, it did.
I think the reviews were really good too. I mean, that's another
Oh,
element, right? The reviews.
yeah.
We did a lot of
Um,
that on the second Shazam movie. Like, why are the reviews not so good and that type
right.
of thing?
The
Because
people
if
listen.
you could have a
People listen.
really high Rotten Tomato viewer score, uh,
Mhm.
and have a low reviewer score, and that seems to, for some people at least, outweigh the fact that people that went to see it liked it. You know,
It seems to influence more the just average theater goer who's like, "Yeah, I might wanna see that. Oh, the critics didn't like it, never mind."
yeah.
Whereas if I'm really interested in the character, I don't wanna say I don't care what the critics think, but I am going to see it no matter what, That's not
Right, right.
really a
And if you don't,
factor.
if you say that, you say, "Well, I'll just wait, a couple of months or whatever. It'll be streaming, and I'll watch it then."
Exactly, and that's where, what we were talking about before, if it's not getting great reviews, there's a good chance as of 2020, people are
Hmm.
just gonna wait. Because
Yeah.
honestly, I think if Justice League had come out after 2020, I don't think it makes 655,000,000. I think it does significantly worse. I think the same thing of Batman versus Superman, a movie that, correct me if I'm wrong, how would that cross 1,000,000,000 with inflation now?
Yeah, Batman versus Superman have to be on my list. It actually made, a lot of people don't think it did that well, but it made in 2016
Mhm.
$873,637,000.
Which is a
Adjusted for inflation, um, it would be a $1 billion movie. 1,104,256,000.
That's amazing, and that shows that movie was a sequel,
Yeah.
multiple heroes, both all pop culture icons, arguably. I mean, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, even Aquaman, The Flash, you can maybe put in there. Why I think I think that probably saved that movie before streaming, because the critical reviews were not good. Because
Mhm,
the theatrical release of that film was not a good film, in my opinion. Like, there
mhm.
were elements I thought were really cool, and there were moments I liked, but the studio forced Zack Snyder to cut out a lot to shorten it, and there are parts that basically didn't make sense.
I
So
I agree 100%. Matter of fact, as soon as the extended cut was available, I mean, I didn't buy it. It's downloaded. It's on my Amazon or whatever it is, one
yeah,
of the
yeah.
things that I have there. And I
Mhm.
watched it. I said, "Oh, it's only about a half hour longer."
Yeah.
And I said, "Oh, this makes so much more sense now." You know?
Mhm.
I mean, that's one of the things that hurts, and you mentioned this with respect to Justice League, at least on the DC side, it seemed to hurt a lot where the studio just kind of got involved, didn't let the director play it out. And you
Right.
know my thing, right? If you have multiple heroes, you need a 3-hour movie.
Yeah.
That's my
Yeah,
that's my
exactly.
view.
Agreed.
So that could hurt a movie as
Yeah.
well. And I think on the DC side, it certainly did hurt some of those
But
movies quite a bit.
I guess my contention is, had those movies been released after COVID, they wouldn't have made nearly the money that
Yeah,
they did.
right,
I think that's where
right.
the timing comes into it, because I just don't think they were as well received. And those movies, maybe Justice League is a $300 million movie. Maybe Batman versus Superman is a $400 million movie or less. If people say, "Oh, the critics hate it," I'll watch it on HBO Max in 2 months. You know?
Okay, Dave. I have two more things I wanted to bring up
Yeah.
before we kind of wrap this up. I think this
Hmm.
has been a great conversation. I'm really enjoying this. Hopefully, you guys
Thank
out
you.
there are enjoying it too. Give it a thumbs up if you enjoy. Okay, so a couple of other things. I think with the Marvel movies, you mentioned that people that grew up with it and said that's the movies I'm going to see.
Yeah.
So, what about word of mouth? Do you think, we have a bunch of people that kind of we deal with on Instagram and so forth, and We kind of trade. Well, I like this movie. I don't like this movie. That type of stuff like that. But how much do you think word of mouth really helps or hurts a movie?
Uh, wow. I mean, the problem with word of mouth is it's purely anecdotal. I don't
Right.
know that we have data on word of mouth. I mean, I'll just go to a recent example. Shazam 2, which is a film I liked. The critics didn't love it, so it did not do very well. I know a couple people, a couple guys I work with. I'm like, this is a good movie. I recommend it. One guy's like, oh, that's cool. I'll go watch it. He went to the theaters and he watched it. So in that instance, word of mouth mattered. I had another buddy of mine who was like, yeah, I'll just still wait for streaming. And he did. And you know what he did? He
Right.
waited until it came out in streaming. He found me the next day. He's like, Dave, that was a great movie. I'm like, I know. You should have gone to see it in the theaters. But
Right. IMAX, baby, IMAX.
exactly. So word of mouth, definitely it plays into it. To what degree, I couldn't say in terms of money and finances. I'd love to see if there's a study about word of
Yeah.
mouth seems to a degree. I don't know.
See,
I
I
wish I
think
had a
that
good answer
today
for you. What do you
it's
think?
less important than when I was a kid.
Yeah,
You
that
know,
makes sense.
when I was a kid, I remember when 2001 Space Odyssey came out. All my friends said, "Oh, you got to go see it, Joe. You got to go see it.
Right.
You got to go see it." So, I remember going to go see that. Um, Batman '89. Well, I was older then,
Yeah.
but my best friend John, who I talk about a lot, we went with our wives and stuff like that. And my wife doesn't necessarily like to see these type of movies, but she came
Right.
anyway because we couldn't wait to see Batman. And
Yeah.
see, after watching the Superman movies, going to see Batman, we were like, "Oh wow, this is great."
Yeah.
And so that was really through word of mouth because you didn't have the internet.
There was a
You
lot
didn't
of
have all
hype
this
for
other stuff
that
here that could
movie, though.
affect you.
There was a
You know?
lot of hype for that movie, though. So, I agree, that yes, especially pre-internet,
Yeah,
pre the possibility of just watching it from your home sofa.
yeah.
I do think word of mouth prior to that mattered more.
That's
There's
my
just
thought.
I agree, and sometimes word of mouth gets to the point of phenomena, like Star Wars. I remember being a kid and seeing news stories on television about couples being married while waiting in line to see Star Wars. Like, it was like,
My wife wouldn't go for that.
no, no, probably not. And since I was 6 or 7 at the time, that was not an option. Um, so, yeah, no, I mean, yes, that's where word of mouth and people talking about it mattered more. I think you're probably right. It matters less simply because people, "Oh, okay, it's good, but I can watch it on my television."
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's so many things that pull at you or influence you that maybe it's important but not the same. Doesn't carry the same weight it used to.
Okay, and the other thing that I wanted to get your comments on has to
Yeah.
do with competition.
Mm.
I mean, you see a lot of times the movie theaters or the movie studios rather will like they did this with the Aquaman movie. Like we're going to move this movie here because this other thing's coming out, or the World Series is going,
Mhm.
or whatever it happens to be.
Yep.
Do you really think that that makes a difference with respect to the movie's success?
I mean, I'll go back to the example again. Shazam 2 was supposed to come out the same week as the second Avatar film, the Avatar sequel, Way of the Water. And they're like, oh no, we are not putting this movie out when that comes out. We'll get steamrolled. They got steamrolled anyway, unfortunately, because of mediocre critic reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, which that's an entirely different discussion. If you want to do a video on that, I would love to do that because I have really strong specific thoughts about that whole system. But I mean, yeah, it feels like everybody's competing for the same oxygen. I think if you really want to see it, you're going to see it no matter what. If there's, I think if Marvel released a movie 1 month and then a movie 3 or 4 weeks later, they'd probably still both do well. I think head-to-head competition, there's something to that, especially
Mhm.
now,
Yeah.
because people just are very specific what they're willing to go see in the theaters and what they're not. What they're willing to either risk their health over, depending on whether it's COVID or the flu or whatever, or the theater experience is expensive. You may have noticed that. I
I
mean,
know.
So am I really going to spend $15 on 3 movies in the same weekend or within a 2-week span? Maybe not, because I'm paying
Yeah.
that per month for a streaming service and I can just wait a couple months. If there's for example, I heard good things about the film Dungeons and Dragons. And I'm like, "Oh, that sounds like fun. I'd like to see it." I just didn't get around to it. And then within a couple weeks, I'm like, "Oh, it's gonna be on Paramount Plus in a week.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, I'll watch that because I pay for that."
Right.
So I think the competition pre-2020 had an impact. I think it has more of an impact now simply because I really do think we're trained just to watch it on our couch if we're not dying to go see it. You know what I
Right, right.
mean?
Okay, well, let's wrap this up. I mean, I think there are a lot of other kind of less significant elements, like the CGI, for example,
Yeah.
the stunning scenes that you may have in a
Yeah.
movie, that make it look good. Even the music. I mean,
Oh,
people talk
yeah.
about
Good soundtrack.
some of the themes. People still
Mhm.
talk about them. They become recognizable, and so forth. And so I think there are a lot of other things there. But let's close
Doesn't
it
hurt
up and
to
let
have
me ask
Robert
you, like,
Downey.
what are your closing thoughts on this
Well, it
issue?
also doesn't hurt to have Robert Downey Jr. in your film. Half of these billion-dollar movies have him in them.
That's why he was
Um,
making so much money. That's probably why they killed him in Endgame because he probably was going to demand I don't know how much money.
I did read things to that effect that they're like, "We're kinda tired of paying him $50 million a picture." How true is that? I can't say. But
Right.
yeah, I do think we hit a lot of these. Some of the perplexing ones for me were Captain Marvel, Aquaman. I was a little surprised it made 1 billion. The
Me
Joker
too.
film, even though Joker's the Joker, that was surprising. Um, yeah, I think we covered a lot, and it'd be fun to, like, dig in even deeper into some of these individual films. That'd be a lot of fun, but maybe that's a separate video for another day. But
Just
it
bring it up to me, babe. Give me
I
the
will, but
outline.
I'll tell you what, like you said, your points were great about a good story, a good hero, compelling villain. I do think there's something to be said that these are sequels or they follow successful films, have
Mhm.
lots of heroes, and some of these are just have either were or have become, huge important characters in our American lexicon. We know what you're talking about if you say, someone's as evil as Thanos or as patriotic as Captain America. Like these are touchstones now for us.
Well, even
Um,
I mean, I think the villains do not to get back into it too much, but
yeah.
like Killmonger,
Mm,
and Black
yeah,
Panther was a great villain, I think,
mhm.
because he was complex, as well,
He was.
and even in the old X-Men movies, I mean, the Magneto
Mhm.
who's great, a great villain. So I think
I agree.
these different things, those three elements that I came up with, were just kind of really basic stuff that I thought most people can agree with. But there are so
Yeah,
many other elements. You're right that
there
kind of
always
play
are.
into
Y
this.
and you're Yeah,
You know,
no doubt. Like you said, even as something as simple as having a great soundtrack really elevates
it
your
does.
emotions during a film, so
Right.
that's
Right.
important too.
So I don't know that we've really come up with the formula for this, but we've come up with a lot of different things that can affect it. And
Yeah.
so it's up to to you movie studios to come up with the stuff that works. And you're smart people. So don't put out bad movies. That's it.
Tell a great story, and you're probably gonna be okay,
Right.
although there are exceptions. So,
So, all right, Dave, thanks so much for being involved with this. I mean, I'm glad that we talked about it beforehand because I think this made this video a lot better and a lot of things to think about, and
yeah.
maybe we can have a subsequent discussion on one or more of these movies.
You know what?
So, Dave's links will be below. Follow him on Instagram and also on YouTube, Action Figure Comedy. We want to see some more comedy too. Come on, get to
I
come out with something.
It's been a while, so we'll have to see. I've been taking a break.
They're short, they're sweet, and they bring a smile to my face. So I
Well,
like
thank
them.
you. I appreciate that. I'm glad to hear that. And yeah, maybe we do a part two because as we've noticed with these billion-dollar films, the sequels are where the big money is at.
That's right. All right, guys. So thanks for watching. Again, if you really enjoyed this, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see Dave back talking about more movies, let me know in the comment area. If you have some other factors that we haven't thought of, and that's probably not the case because we're pretty smart guys. No, I'm just joking. Any others? put it down in the comments. Let us know.
Love to
Maybe
hear it.
give us an idea to do our sequel on this, on some comment that you put in there. And with
Maybe a
that,
trilogy.
the trilogy. All right, with that, we'll say good night. Thanks a lot, guys. Really appreciate you tuning in. Bye-bye.